October 19th, the Thunder open up the season against who else but the Knicks. Stephen A., what jumps out to you about this new deal?
Well, a couple of things jump out to me. Number one, the Oklahoma City Thunder are officially the number 2 team in the Western Conference. I'm anticipating that they will be the ones to meet the Warriors. I know that San Antonio and Houston expect to have something to say about it. But I think it's going to be Oklahoma City. Russell Westbrook and Paul George make up the best backcourt in the NBA. You combine that with Melo being able to give you something, along with you still keeping Steven Adams and Roberson being a defensive ace. You got 4 defenders on the floor with Melo, okay? And offensively, you got 3 juggernauts. So I think you look at it from that perspective, that's a big deal. That's the number one thing that jumps out at me. Number 2, Phil Jackson sabotaged it, Max, because the New York Knicks and others throughout the league told me New York Knicks couldn't get but so much because Phil had devalued Melo so badly that ultimately teams were like, what you going to get for him? So Phil hurt Melo in this regard. That's one of the reasons why the Knicks couldn't get but so much, right? That's true. I don't blame you. Last but not least, remember I said this. Do you know who the biggest loser in all of this is? CP3, Chris Paul, with the Los Angeles Clippers, decide at age 32 to leave Los Angeles, partially because he didn't want to play for Doc Rivers anymore. 5 years, in excess of $200 million was on the table for him. He didn't want it, took a chance on himself, going to Houston, anticipated he would get Melo. Now you don't get Melo, but Melo's out west with somebody else, and as a result, legitimately, 3 teams in the West, Golden State, OKC, and San Antonio, are better than Houston. And if you're CP3, you probably ain't going to get any further than you did with the Clippers. As much, no disrespect to James Harden, who's a superstar, but you probably ain't going to get no further than you did with the Clippers, and you don't get the $200 million. Wow.
Whatever misgivings people might have about how this all works with Carmelo needing the ball, Paul George wanting the ball, although Paul George plays he's the kind of prototypical modern player you want, and Westbrook needing the ball, as Coach Mackey, my daughter's basketball skills instructor, runs the league where she goes to get her game up.
That's right.
Says just now it's Carmelo taking those shots instead of Roberson. I mean, that's a huge improvement, especially if the starting 5, if you play Paul George at the 2, you got Westbrook, Paul George, Carmelo at the 3, Patrick Patterson at the 4, Adams at the 5.
Right.
That matches up with the Warriors. Ideally it matches up with the Warriors. There's the issue of the bench and how this is all going to gel. But I agree with you. This is potentially, I think, much better than ESPN Analytics thinks it is. They think it's a 1-game improvement for the Thunder. It seems to me intuitively to be more than that. But this is my big takeaway. Here's the question. This is the question I'm going to ask all of you out there. Do the smart have a moral responsibility not to prey upon the stupid? I'm looking right at you, Sam Presti. Is it really right what you just did to the Knicks? Is it right? Think about how bad an organization the Knicks are. Sam Presti just exploited them. Shame on you, Sam Presti. Think of how bad this organization is. They could have gotten so much more for Carmelo 18 months ago. They held on to him for way too long. And for what? To make your draft position a little bit worse than it might have otherwise been? And now when you finally move him, you get a guy who's overpaid in Cantor, who's going to move Kristaps Porzingis to the 4 when Kristaps Porzingis should really be playing the 5 now, and a second-round draft pick, and Dougie McBuckets, who's not the pro, obviously, that he was in college. Right. That's what you got? You actually just made your team worse than it already was? When you could have gotten so much more?
No, here's the biggest problem. Melo had a no-trade clause, wouldn't waive it unless certain conditions were met.
Meet him.
To go to, Cleveland wouldn't return their call. Houston tried to get them to take Ryan Anderson with 3 years and $60 million left on their deal. So considering the circumstances, you got an Enes Kanter who's 14 to 16, but that was money come off your books possibly after this season. Doug McDermott, same thing. Essentially what the New York Knicks
conceded, salary dump.
It's a salary dump.
But Stephen A., my point is that means they held him too long.
What I'm saying to you is that, but why? Because he wouldn't waive his no-trade clause because, again, Phil couldn't go out there and get him, and then Phil devalued him.
Ding.
So it was
Phil Jackson. So this comes back to Phil Jackson and a rotten organization.
I'm not going to blame Steve Mills for this. I'm not going to blame Scott Perry for this. This is all on Phil Jackson.
I'm not blaming Steve Mills. This is the organization of the Knicks. Good going.
This is Dolan. This is Dolan completely empowering Phil, and Phil giving Melo the no-trade clause, then devaluing him to the point where you're
ashamed of their track record. Dolan, aren't you ashamed of your track record? You should be ashamed.
8 former All-Star switched teams conferences this year. 7 of them went east to west. The West just gets wilder.